Okay, so write a function my for each. Const my for each equals a function. Cool, wrote it. It's all good, don't worry about it. Write a function my for each that accepts an array and a callback as a function. Array func. Everyone good? Everyone understand? I'm just literally doing what the README says. The behavior of my for each should mirror the functionality of the native for each array method. So, let's go over what for each does. If you do have an array and you say for each, what is the argument you give for each? A function, right? So, and then what does for each do for you? It loops through the array for sure, and it passes into that function the current element at the array and that current index. Okay? So, we do this. We will return no, we will just do a for loop for let I equals 0. Whoops. I is less than array.length I plus plus. And now we will say func, and we will invoke it, and we will pass in array at I as the first argument, and then I as the second argument. Let's see if that works. It works. Okay? That's all you need to do. Because what does for each return? Nothing. For each doesn't give you a value. For each does not return anything. For each loops through an array, takes in a function, and calls that function on each element. This problem is not like, oh, well, what are we going to get out of it? No. We just have to really write for each. And what for each does is very simple. You use for each to usually alter different data sets somewhere else, okay? Like you have an array, then you write this function, then you do my for each, and then it does something to each element, and it like updates something else somewhere else. Does that make sense? Like for each has its use case, but it doesn't actually return anything. For each returns undefined. Because functions that return nothing return undefined. Yeah. Array at I is what? Array bracket I is not the index. Just I is the index. Array bracket I is the actual element. Yes. Then you do array of I, comma, I. Array of I is the current element, so that's the first argument, comma, we get to the second argument, we pass in I, the current index. We pass in the current element and the current index. Does that make sense? Because for each, it only says to mimic what for each does. For each throws you the element and the index, whether you like it or not. That's what for each does. You don't have to use the index at all. You know? You just don't have to. Your function that you pass into for each, you don't have to like account for the index. It is optional. you do need to account for the array. However, since we're writing, we do have to account for the current element. But since we're writing for each throws you that index anyway, passes it in, whether this function that you wrote, func is the thing that you wrote, whether this function accounts for index inside of itself is up to that function. For each doesn't care. It's just going to throw you the element and the index every time. Does that make sense? Any questions on that? No? Okay. What is the next thing? The next thing is chain reaction. Let's see what this README says. Define a function chain reaction. Const chain reaction is equal to a function. Step 1 complete. That takes a starting value and an array of functions. Okay? So it takes a start and an array. I don't care what's in the array. I'm just going to refer to it in the function as an array. Each index will be a function, but it is an array, right? So we will treat it as an array. Chain reaction should pass the starting value into the first function in the array. It should pass the value returned by the first function into the second function, and so on until every function in the array was called, and then return the final value. So, we can say for let I equals 0, right? I is less than array dot length I plus plus. So we know that we have to loop through this, right? We know that we have to loop through, we have to get every function, we have to do something, okay? So if I were to take the starting value and pass it into array at I, that would be the first function, right? What if I did that array at I, invoke it with start. So I do that, and I get a return value. But I know what this thing is returning, I need to pass into the next one. So I will say, let's returned val equal this. So now returned val is going to be equal to that. Okay? Then, after this, I can just say start equals return val. I reassign what start is. Then outside of the loop, I can just return start. Let's see if this works. See how easy that was? I feel like these questions for this past workshop were actually very easy if you read them README and did them step by step. This one, not so much, because you had to know, I'll go back to the REPL because it's a bigger screen. Whoops. You have to know that, okay, and you don't even have to do this. You could just do this. Because we know start is being defined up here in chain reaction, right? We know that. It's going to be a starting value. We take that starting value, we throw it through the function, which is array at I. Array at I is a function. If you guys don't like how that looks with the bracket and then the parentheses, I could say let current function equal to array at I. And then here I could just say current function. Same thing, right? What is better? Okay. So this is better, right? I take out array at I, because this is an array of functions. The problem told us that. So array at I each time will be a different function. So now, we take a current function, we invoke it. And when you invoke something, something will be returned. Either what the function is telling itself to return, or undefined if it returns nothing. Whatever it is, we don't care. We don't care about that. Whatever this thing is returning, we want start to be that value. Because then we want to reassign start. We don't want to increment start. We don't want to remove start. We don't want to make a new value up here. We could, but why? Start is just a variable itself. So we reassign start, so the next iteration of the loop, start will be something else, where we pass in here. And current function will be the next function. Any questions on this? Not too bad, right? Seriously, any questions? I just did those two problems very quickly, so feel free. What's that? Okay. So today, so yesterday you guys learned that functions are like, sort of like everything else. They're just values that you can throw around wherever you want. So, how do I say this? So, if I said that functions can return functions, would you think that I'm crazy? Why? But functions, wait, because they can't? They can, so why would you sound crazy? So, if functions are values and functions return values, functions can return functions, right? So, if I have a const Hobbit, and I say it's equal to a function, and it returns an anonymous function with no name, this can also be written like this, just no name, if I spell it right. What's wrong? This could also be done like this, but I like doing the fat arrow thing. So I can return this, and I can say, in this function, we will return Sam is better than Frodo, right? So if I say down here, let truth equal to Hobbit invoked, and down here, we can console.log truth, what will we get? We will get a function, because this is possible. So, now that I did this, what if I invoked this? We get Sam is better than Frodo. This might seem weird to you, but if you really slow down a second and take a look at it, everything I just did should make sense, right? I'm just saying there's a function called Hobbit, and inside of it, nothing happens, but we're just going to return another function. And I'm defining that function net inside the return statement. And it is anonymous, it does not have a name. So, if I say truth, this variable truth is equal to Hobbit invoked, JavaScript is going to say, okay, well, I have to assign truth a value, and it's this crazy guy is saying, okay, what is Hobbit, and it's invoking. So this is clearly a function. I have to run this function, and I have to see what that function returns. So, truth will be equal to this, right? So then truth I could just use as whatever I want, as this function. I can use it wherever I want to. And the same thing, like I did it here as the return, but I could say let inner truth equal to a function or I'll just do it this way. Function inner truth, and I'll do return Sam is better than Frodo. And instead of returning an anonymous function, I could just return inner truth. Whoops. And I will get the same thing. Right? I define the function first, and then I just return its name. This does the same thing as returning the function in line. Does anyone have any questions about this general concept that I can return functions, set them equal to a variable, then call that variable later, and that inner function will run outside. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah. Truth becomes a function on line 26, right? Because Hobbit gets invoked, right? And what is Hobbit's return value? It's a function, right? So then that means truth becomes a function. We are assigning truth, a variable out here, the function that was actually defined inside Hobbit. Then here, we're just calling it. And if you got, I'm just saying, if you guys probably are wondering why this is undefined, it's because the entire page is returning nothing, okay? Yeah.
What is the benefit of having the Hobbit wrapper around the function inner truth instead of just having an inner truth function? What do you gain by it?
In this situation, nothing. These, yeah, I mean, like, you know, like, this, in my opinion, this one fact doesn't really amount to anything. Sometimes you will need to write, well, okay, let me continue. I'll show you why this could be beneficial. So, ignore all this. You'll see why this is beneficial with the last workshop problem, just so you know. But I will show you something else. The main point of today's lecture is something called closure, okay? What is closure? Closure is, you have to memorize this definition. Closure is the fact that a function that is defined inside of another function still has access to that outer function's variables when the outer function is finished running. Okay? Let me show you what I mean. Let's say I have a function and I'll call it string maker. And in here I will say let what is the whoops. Let a final string equal to an empty string, okay? And then I will say return a function. And in this function, I will say final string. It will take current string. Final string will plus equals current string. And then I will console.log final string. So, string make let's logger equal string maker invoked. So now, if I say logger, logger hello world, we get hello world in the console, right? If I say logger space goodbye world, hello world goodbye world is the second thing logged. That's because, and let me show you something. That up here, the return, does everyone agree that when a function hits the return keyword, it stops running? So, string maker stopped here. It went through it, it defined its own final string as an empty string, it console logged string maker, and then it returned its function. That all happened on line 40. Okay? That all happened on line 40 because string maker was ran because we needed to find a return value to assign to logger. Now, once I call logger with hello world, logger is this thing. Current string will be hello world, final string. But this logger thing, this anonymous function, doesn't know what final string is. But see, the thing is that it actually does. Because when the function was defined, it had access to this outer variable final string. So, we can use this even when this thing isn't running anymore. On line 42 and 43, string maker is not running, okay? That's not running. But these things still have access to that variable. Does that make sense? And this is what closure is. It's that fact, this solid fact, that I can access this later. That's what closure is. Closure. Closure. That's what closure is, okay? Does anyone have any questions about this? Does anyone have any questions about closure? What if what if I did this? You get world undefined, right? Why is that? Why does this say world undefined over here? We didn't pass anything into logger, right? And what is logger? This function, right? So if I didn't pass anything in, what is current string? Undefined. And since closure, because closure, final string has been recording these values every time it's being called. It's a record. So that's why it's hello world goodbye world undefined. It's not just undefined. Yes.
You didn't call the function when you define logger.
If I didn't what?
You didn't call string maker, and that's just equal to the function string maker, right? It
Yep.
doesn't do anything.
Yeah, so if I didn't do this, oh shit. If I did that, that's all that happens. It just runs and returns this, but like whatever. Yeah. What happens? Let me just show you. What happens? So let's say I'll do it here, like const add to string equals a function, current string, whatever. A little bit of the good old copy pasta over here. Oh shit. Okay. And I did that. What would happen now? What would logger be? I'm not gonna run it. What would logger be? What would logger be? I'll take a wild guess. Wild guesses are better than silence. Yeah. Yeah. So do you think that logger will be add to string? Does anyone agree with that? Huh?
That'd be the function that is string.
It will be. Yeah. It will be undefined. Because what am I doing on line 38? I am invoking add to string. So we are returning add to string invoked. Since I'm invoking add to string, JavaScript will say string maker will return, oh, what is this? Something is being invoked. Let's find out what this thing returns. Add to string returns nothing. It just console logs this thing. So if I try to run this page, we get a crazy error because you can't invoke undefined. If I comment that out and I console log logger, we get undefined. I got two undefineds. Oh, because I'm calling it here. Final string is undefined. Interesting. Interesting. Okay, but does everyone understand why this invocation makes all the difference? If I don't do this, then you're right. I do get the function. You're right. Add to string, that's what logger is. You guys were right. However, if I invoke it, all of you were really wrong. Except my man over there. It's nice. Does everyone understand this? Why this is undefined? Yeah. So if add return, if add to string return, return year, then it's this. But we still can't invoke that, right? We get a reference error because you can't invoke strings. So if this actually did return another function, then it'd be different. But since this is what we want to do, okay? And why is it that logger keeps adding on to final string. Why do we still have access to final string? Closure. Okay? What is closure? I swear to God. What is closure? The fact that a function has access to outside parameters after the parent function is done running. That's the key part. So you can think what not really, but like there's a term. Well, never mind. Okay, there's this thing called factory functions. You could think of string maker sort of like a factory function, right? It just spits out all these functions that do these things. Usually factory functions are returned to functions that return like objects that, but like let's not go there. For God's sake. Yeah. Yeah, sure. I could just put it in here. Is that easy? I'll put it up here before we go into string maker. All right. So, any questions before I go into slides? Because there's honestly not that much more to go besides that we can return functions and that they have access to outer parameters. Variables. And parameters. Parameters are variables. That make sense? That make sense? Okay. Let's dive into the slides. Sorry. Closure. Let's talk about it. So in this overview of this lecture, we will be talking about returning functions from functions and closure. So, returning values from functions. We know that functions can return values, right? This function returns a string, I am a string. So, we say let return value equal to that, invoked. Return value equal to returns a string, invoked. So, return value is I am a string. Is everyone okay with this? Right? Yeah. Yes. 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 It would say, since this function is named, it would be bracket function : space returns a string. Like if I didn't invoke returns a string, it would just like return value would be that function, right? Yeah.
Is there a reason? Did you ever want to do that?
Maybe. You will see like a good example of why this could be useful in the workshops with the last question. Okay? I don't want to give it away.
In the previous unit, we learned that functions are like any other values, so if functions can return values and functions are values, then functions can return other functions. So, here we have a function, greetMe, right? We're just defining a function called greetMe, and all greetMe does is console.log hi. Then we have another function over here, and it says getGreeter, and this returns greetMe. We're returning the function without calling it. We are not invoking greetMe. We are just saying return greetMe. Then we say down here, let greeter equal getGreeter invoked. Stop. JavaScript is saying, what is greeter? I have to find out what value to assign greeter. And since you're invoking a function, we know we have to run a function to get a value. GetGreeter is then run, and it returns greetMe, which is a function. So, greeter is greetMe. Console.log type of greeter, function. Greeter, function greetMe. You invoke greeter, we see hi in the console. Any questions on that? Yeah. Why don't we? Well, if greetMe was invoked, let greeter equal getGreeter invoked, right? So JavaScript needs to find out what getGreeter returns, right? So then getGreeter, we run it, and it returns greetMe invoked. So now JavaScript says we have to find out what greetMe returns, right? Because greetMe is now invoked. So then greetMe gets invoked, greetMe returns undefined. Type of greeter will be undefined. Console.log greeter will be undefined. Greeter invoked, undefined invoked, reference error, it's not a function. That's why. Does everyone understand that? If this thing returned a function, then that would be fine if we invoked greetMe here. But it doesn't. Oh. Look at, you're one step ahead. Look at this. What if we did invoke it? Hi. Undefined. Undefined. Type error. You might be asking where the hi comes from. It's because when we invoke this, this thing runs. So this is constant, okay? But the return value of this is undefined, so then this would then be undefined. So then getGreeter returns undefined, so then greeter is undefined. And when you try to call undefined, you can't do that. You can't call undefined or null or strings or numbers or arrays. You only call functions. Does that make sense? Here's another example of pretty much the same thing, except we can declare a new inner function and then return it. I showed you this, right? We can say the function inside of getGreeter will be called greetMe, and inside, after we define it, we just return that function, right? So this is the same thing effectively, right? Is anyone confused by this format? It's the same thing as before, but now we're just defining greetMe inside of getGreeter instead of outside of it. Yeah.
On the previous slide, after letGreeter equals getGreeter, if you put return greeter, would that change the result from undefined to calling a function?
Wait, what?
If you added on line 10, return greeter, what would that do?
Then the console.logs wouldn't run, line 13 wouldn't run, and this thing would return undefined.
Returning.
Yeah. Because greeter is undefined, right? So if we just return greeter, we're just returning undefined. This stuff won't run. You won't get the type error, but what will happen is that you will return undefined. Does that make sense? Am I boring you guys? I guess I am. Sick. So, no questions here, right? Same thing as the previous slide, except now it's inside. So, we can return anonymous functions too. And I did show you this. I went back and forth, right, to show you that anything is possible. I'm just returning an inline function, not an inline function because it's in multiple lines, but an anonymous function on the spot. Not defining it anywhere else. I'm just saying return this function. This function will have a name. Well, technically, it will have a name when you say let greeter equal get greeter, because now greeter is going to be this function. So technically, greeter is that anonymous function, right? So we get high when we invoke greeter, because greeter is this anonymous function, and this anonymous function, all it does is console log high. The only difference between this slide and this slide is that here we are saying function greet me, defining it and then returning it here. And then here, we're not calling it anything, we're just returning it there in the fat arrow way. You could also write anonymous functions if you just do function, open, close paren, and then that's like this with no fat arrow. Right? You just don't give it a name. Any questions? Yeah.
If you were to write that where like you're gonna write it with that arrow, but you put like const the function name, can you do that like that on return line?
No, you can't return a declaration. Right? You would have to declare a variable, whatever, assign it equal to an anonymous function. Because whenever you use functions, anonymous, like the fat arrow, I mean, if you don't do them when you're passing it into functions or returning them, all you're doing is assigning them to a variable, right? So you always have to declare them. And if you guys remember, with hoisting, that becomes a little weird, okay? These variables are set to undefined, but if you use the function keyword, the entire function gets copied during hoisting. Right? So you can't return let, you know? Well, cons. Can I go on? What if our return function takes a parameter? This does exactly what you would logically think would happen. If getGreeter returns a function, and we say greeter is now going to be equal to getGreeter invoked, that means that greeter will be equal to getGreeter's return value, which is this function. It is literally this function. So, when we call greeter and we pass in Mary, when this function was defined, this parameter was defined as well, name, and it is referenced inside of the function. So, Mary, hi Mary. Rosalind, hi Rosalind. And if we don't pass anything in, what is name? Undefined. If you run a function that takes parameters and you don't pass in those parameters, don't pass in those arguments. So, then inside of the function definition, wherever the parameter is referenced, that will be undefined. Any questions? Does that make sense? That if this takes a parameter, then you could do this. If you have a question, ask it, please. Okay? I won't make fun of you. Yeah.
So I get what you're saying on line 8, but I still am having a hard time grasping it because it almost seems like you're calling the function getGreeter and you're assigning it to the value greeter, but then you have to call greeter.
Well, what is
and
get
you have to not call it.
what does getGreeter return?
Well, it returns a function, but
Okay.
it seems like you're calling the function with the parentheses of that, so that's why I'm confused.
This,
Yeah.
if I said greeter equals getGreeter without this, greeter would just be this whole thing. If I invoke it, greeter will now be whatever getGreeter returns. Don't worry about what it's returning.
Returning the function.
Yeah,
and
don't worry
that's
about
what's
that.
returning.
It will be whatever getGreeter returns. String, whatever. In this case, getGreeter is returning a function. So now greeter is a function. So that means we can now call it down here. And we know, since we wrote this code, that this function that we're returning in here takes a parameter. So, since this is this, right? This is this. This takes this. So this takes that. We write this function. It takes a parameter name. We set this function equal to greeter by calling getGreeter. Then when we want to call greeter, we can throw in a parameter.
So if you didn't have the function on 3, and you just had console log I name, and then on 8 you said let greeter equal getGreeter parentheses, then it would actually greeter would actually equal console log I.
No. Greeter would equal undefined. Because console log does nothing. Console log just prints things in the terminal for humans to read. It doesn't add to your program. It doesn't add to the application. It doesn't return a value, right? And if all this had was console log, and there was no return key, getGreeter would implicitly return undefined. Because functions that return nothing, when there is no return key, implicitly returns undefined. So, greeter would be undefined. And then when you try to invoke undefined, as we saw before, you get a crazy type error. Right? Everyone good? Any questions? Nice. All right. So before we talk about closure, let's talk about scope. Inner functions can access variables defined in outer functions, right? Like, do you guys remember this when we did scope, right? Like, in greeter, we have let name equals Mary. And then inside that, we have let says hi equal function console log hi name. And then we call says hi down here. So if we call greeter, what happens when we run greeter? Let's go through it line by line. Greeter's run. Where's greeter? Here. Inside of the function, let name equals Mary. So we have something called Mary. Then we have let says hi. Okay, what is let says hi? It's equal to some function. Then the last line in greeter is we call says hi. So now we go into says hi. We see what's going on. And it just console logs hi.name. Says hi, this thing says, okay, what is name? It looks at its own scope, can't find it, so it goes up. Name is here. And that's why we see hi Mary. You guys remember scope can only go up. You can only look upwards. You can't look downwards, okay? This is a refresher, right? Does everyone understand how this is possible, why this works? Any questions? Okay, cool. So now, the closure definition. Closure is the fact that an inner function can still access values defined in the outer function even after the outer function is finished running. Right? So, here's an example. We have function getGreeter. The first line, it says console.log getGreeter is running, right? We run getGreeter, so that thing's going to console log. Let name equal Mary, and then we're going to say console.log getGreeter is finishing. And we know it's finishing is because the next line, there's a blank line, but the next line after that is a return statement. So then after that, it's done, okay? So when we say greeter is equal to getGreeter invoked, it'll console log getGreeter is running, then it'll say getGreeter is finishing, and then it will say that greeter is not going to be equal to the return value, which is this function. So when we invoke greeter here, we get Hi Mary, because this name looks here. Yeah.
There's the let name